Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Almighty God, who in thy wisdom and goodness has appointed the office of rulers and parliaments for the welfare of society and the just government of men, we beseech thee to behold with thy abundant favor us thy servants whom thou hast been pleased to call to the performance of important trust in these islands. Let thy blessing descend upon us here assembled, and grant that we may treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote thy honor and glory, and to advance the peace, prosperity, and welfare of these islands and of those whose interests thou hast committed to our charge. And this we beg for Jesus Christ, his sake. Amen. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen.
Morning, members. The House is not in session. Okay. Members, before we get started, I'd just like to make one announcement for us before we even get to that stage of announcements. The SharePoint system isn't accessible right now this morning, and you may or may not know, you're missing Mr. Lamb here today. Mr. Lamb got married yesterday. So he's, as we would all expect, out having a honeymoon days. So we don't have him available this morning to resolve the issue. What will be done is that we'll email everything to your email rather than put it on SharePoint. So you'll find it on email as the day progresses, okay? But we acknowledge the fact that he isn't present today, and we pleasantly acknowledge the reason why he's not present, okay?
Confirmation of minutes.
Members, the minutes of March 10th and 13th have been circulated. Are there any amendments required? There are none. The minutes will be printed, confirmed as printed.
Messages from the governor.
There are none.
Announcements by the speaker or member presiding.
Members, again, another announcement that acknowledges our staff, in that many of you know that, I think most of you in the room, other than myself and a couple others, have came into this building and found Madam Clerk already ahead of you. Well, Madam Clerk has celebrated 20 years in these chambers, serving us as the head of the legislative staff and administration. She marks her 20 years and will be retiring the end of next month. And today will be her last day in Parliament, because her retirement will take place while Parliament is out of session. So we just want to acknowledge her long service, let her know we appreciated the service that she's given to the Parliament and to country, and that we wish her well in her retirement, and we will miss her presence amongst us here for the valuable service that she's offered, not only to the legislative staff, but to the assistance of members of Parliament and, in fact, both houses. So we have to acknowledge that. I'm sure you all will join me in acknowledging that at the appropriate time, and congratulations comes up later this morning. Yes. Thank you. And the other announcement this morning, we received notice from MP Caesar and MP Simmons Wade that they'll be absent today. And I also have to read out for the announcement from the Auditor General Public Interest Report on the Government of Bermuda's response to the COVID-19 test travel authorization. And it reads as follows. I, as Speaker, announce that I have received the Auditor General's interest report on the Government of Bermuda's response to the COVID-19 travel authorization, which has been submitted to me pursuant to Section 13 of the Audit Act 2010. 1990. That's it for announcements this morning.
Messages from the Senate,
There are none.
papers and other communications to the House.
There are two papers this morning. The first is in the name of the Minister of Transport.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to attach and submit for the consideration of the Honorable House of Assembly the Merchant Shipping Fees Regulations 2023 made by the Minister responsible for Maritime Administration and exercise of the power conferred by Section 250 of the Merchant Shipping Act 2002.
Thank you. And the second is in the name of the Minister of Health. Minister?
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to attach and submit for the information of the Honorable House of Assembly the Bermuda Hospitals Board Annual Report for the year 2019.
Thank you.
Petitions,
There are none.
statements by ministers and junior ministers.
Members, we have quite a few statements this morning. The first statement this morning is in the name of the Minister of Tourism and Cabinet Office, Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is with considerable pleasure that I rise today to inform this honorable House that Cabinet recently approved amendments to the Tourism Investment Act 2017. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of these amendments is to permit the minister responsible for tourism greater discretion under the act in the grant of relief to developers and those investing in attractions, restaurants, and hotels. Mr. Speaker, honorable members of this House will recall the grant of relief related to the payment of applicable taxes to the developers of the Fairmont Southampton Hotel for a period of 15 years and the jurisdictional analysis that accompanied that consideration. I hasten to note, Mr. Speaker, that other competitor jurisdictions provide relief of up to 20 years and in some cases longer for developers investing in hotels for both new hotel development as well as the refurbishment of existing hotel properties. Mr. Speaker, in keeping with this trend and in an effort to secure further investment in Bermuda's tourism product, I would like to remind this honorable House of government's undertaking in the 2022 speech from the throne. The government's role is to provide the legislation that will support a tourism recovery, and as such, in this session, the legislature will take under consideration amendments to the Tourism Investment Act 2017 to permit the government greater discretion in the grant of relief under the act to developers and those investing in attractions, restaurants, and hotels. Mr. Speaker, the act currently permits a maximum of 10 years of relief in the case of a new hotel and specifies the period of relief to be granted in the case of refurbishment of a hotel, a new or existing restaurant, or an attraction. A grant of relief for a longer period requires an act of the legislature specifically drafted for that purpose. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to inform this honorable House that Cabinet has approved amendments to the act that will permit the following discretion in the grant of relief with all other elements under the scale of relief unchanged. A new hotel up to 15 years, a refurbished hotel up to 15 years, a new restaurant up to 5 years, an existing restaurant up to 3 years, an attraction up to 5 years. Mr. Speaker, an additional amendment to the act will permit the minister to consider the aggregate value of investment in any property over a period of 7 years prior to the instant application for relief. Mr. Speaker, it is my firm belief that these amendments will provide the added incentives for entities to invest in Bermuda's tourism product and by extension, provide wide-reaching economic benefits for our country. Mr. Speaker, having acquired Cabinet's approval of these amendments, I confidently anticipate being able to bring these amendments to this House during the next parliamentary session. It is my fervent hope, Mr. Speaker, given the positive impact they will have on our tourism industry, that these amendments will meet with the resounding approval of members of this honorable House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The next statement this morning is in the name of the Minister of Economy and Labor. Minister?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning.
I rise today to provide an update on an initiative spearheaded by the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation, which aims to help the island's next generation of youth entrepreneurs, next generation of young entrepreneur minds launch and sustain their business. The BEDC's Summer Student Entrepreneur Program is an essential initiative for Bermuda and young people, as it offers opportunities for students to gain entrepreneurial skills and create businesses that contribute to the local economy. The initiative is directly in alignment with Goal 6 of the government's youth employment strategy to support and promote youth entrepreneurship. The BEDC is currently promoting the program and is accepting applications from young people between the ages of 16 and 25. Interested individuals can apply for the Summer Student Entrepreneur Program online at www.bedc.bm and complete the application form. The initiative is in its 6th year and exposes our young people to business training lessons in areas such as marketing, time management, customer service, business planning, and navigating any legal aspects of running a business, including health, safety, and liabilities. Mr. Speaker, I am excited to say that the program has already proven successful, with 6 years of statistics of record. Since its establishment in 2018, 47 students have participated in the program, creating various businesses such as locally made skincare products, custom jewelry, animation services, loan care services, and graphic design agencies. These young entrepreneurs have generated approximately $27,000 in revenue, demonstrating the program's positive impact on the local economy. Historically, fruit programs have focused on equipping young people with an entrepreneurial mindset. The specific focus has been preparing our students to take on jobs at various insurance companies, law firms, and other organizations. While these are honorable professions, we know that only some can excel at working in a corporate environment. The Summer Student Entrepreneurship Program promotes a culture of enterprise and entrepreneurship as a viable career option for young people, allowing them to tap into skills that help them to identify and make the most of opportunities, overcome, learn from setbacks, and succeed in a variety of settings. The Summer Student Entrepreneurship Program provides students with a blueprint as they navigate the road to financial independence. Mr. Speaker, the 8-week program provides students with education, startup capital, and mentorship to help them start a business and earn money. To take part, students must complete an application on the BEDC website by April 30th, outlining their basic business plan and providing a cash flow forecast and brief SWOT analysis. To be eligible, they must reside in Bermuda and be enrolled in school. The students will be given a working capital advance from the BEDC to help with startup costs, such as materials and equipment needed to execute their business ideas. Once a week from the scheme's duration, the students will meet with the program coordinator, Deshaun Simmons, to provide a progress report. The initiative will end with a special award and certificate ceremony. Cash prizes will be presented to the top 3 business earners who generate the most income during the summer months. Mr. Speaker, this government believes that the spirit of entrepreneurship must be nurtured and encouraged, especially within our youth. The opportunity to encourage more Bermudians to do for themselves and open doors for themselves and others will go a long way towards reshaping our island into a better and fairer Bermuda. The Summer Student Entrepreneurship Program will allow our youth to immerse themselves in entrepreneurship and create summer employment. We hope they can also begin a lifelong passion for business ownership. We see this as an excellent opportunity for any aspiring young Bermudian and are very excited to see the talent and enthusiasm already surrounding the initiative. Mr. Speaker, while the Summer Student Entrepreneur Program provides some of the students with the first foray into entrepreneurship, once they graduate, they are well on their way to further developing the problem-solving skills required to be successful entrepreneurs and even future leaders of this country. I have had the opportunity to meet and speak with several of the students in the program. They give me a sense of hope, knowing that Bermuda's entrepreneurial future is indeed very bright. I am confident that young people will continue to grow to their full potential if we continue to provide programs like the Summer Student Entrepreneurship Program to support them. It is up to us, the people of Bermuda, to rally around them and offer our support. In conclusion, I am proud of the success achieved by the Summer Student Entrepreneurship Program and am committed to supporting its growth and development in the years to come. I encourage all to join me in this vital endeavor as I look forward to seeing the positive impacts of our youth entrepreneurs, will have on our community. This summer, when we are out and about and see these young people selling their products and services, let's remember to show an interest, give them an encouraging word, and support them with our hard-earned dollars. I also would like to thank the various government departments and private sector organizations that make this program possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, the next statement is also in your name. Would you like to present that at this time?
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to rise today to inform members of this honorable House that today we have made a minimum wage in Bermuda a reality. Our people deserve it. They deserve to enjoy decent work and fair compensation. The Employment Minimum Hourly Wage Order 2023, which was published yesterday, sets the minimum hourly wage rate in Bermuda at $16.40. The order is due to take effect on the 1st of June 2023, and employers of low-wage earners will be required to amend their contracts and/or statements of employment to ensure that they are compliant with the order by the 1st of June 2023. Mr. Speaker, as highlighted in the speech from the throne, this government has made a commitment to the workers of Bermuda to ensure they receive a dignified wage which will allow them to cover their basic needs. This is a promise we have worked diligently and deliberately to implement. It is this government's desire to provide adequate social protections to all Bermudians, and establishing a comprehensive minimum wage is fundamental to ensuring that we progress a just and equitable society. Mr. Speaker, the International Labour Organization, or ILO, as it is commonly referred to, defines minimum wages as the minimum amount of remuneration that an employer is required to pay wage earners for the work performed during a given period, which cannot be reduced by collective agreement or any individual contract. Most modern developed countries have a minimum wage regime. More than 90% of the countries designated as ILO member states currently have a statutory wage scheme of some sort. Considerable evidence-based studies has outlined the many benefits realized by both employers and employees in countries where a minimum wage has been instituted. Minimum wages will assist in promoting fair compensation for employees, improving an individual's quality of life, preventing the exploitation of workers, and preventing working families that are below the poverty line from receiving what many consider being unlivable wages. Mr. Speaker, in April 2021, the Wage Commission provided the Minister responsible for labor with its report, which detailed its recommendations for a minimum hourly wage rate in Bermuda. The Wage Commission determined that building a wage floor will protect Bermuda's labor force, especially those within low-paid occupations such as hospitality, horticulture, and domestic work. In August 2022, the Ministry of Economy and Labor published a position paper entitled Establishing a Minimum Wage in Bermuda, which outlined, among other things, the 3 recommendation options of the Commission, what a minimum wage is, why it is needed in Bermuda, and the benefits to establishing a statutory minimum hourly wage rate. Mr. Speaker, the order provides for a hybrid payment structure for employees who receive commissions, gratuities, and service charges. These employees will receive a basic wage set by their employer, to which service charges, gratuities, or commissions will be added to guarantee a minimum hourly wage rate of $16.40. Where an employer's basic wage plus service charges, gratuities, and/or commissions does not equal the minimum hourly wage rate of $16.40, their employer will be liable to provide the difference. This guarantees that an employee will receive the minimum hourly wage rate for every hour worked. Mr. Speaker, the Employment Minimum Wage Entitlement Act 22 sets out that the guidelines for who is entitled to receive a minimum hourly wage and the enforcement provisions regarding adherence to the payment of a minimum hourly wage rate, among other things. Additionally, it gives labor inspectors the authority to investigate an employee's complaint against his employer and issue enforcement notice to employers who failed to correctly remunerate their employees pursuant to this order. Mr. Speaker, many jurisdictions view minimum wages as a vehicle to take the lowest paid out of poverty. Others view minimum wages as a wage floor below which employers are not permitted to pay. Regardless of the approach, this will improve the lives of many workers, especially those within occupations with traditionally low levels of remuneration. Any business currently operating with a business model that is predicated on poverty wages should seek to change its business model. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Wage Commission and the team within the Ministry of Economy and Labor for the work executed to make a statutory minimum wage in Bermuda a reality. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Members, the next statement this morning is in the name of the Minister of Social Development and Seniors. Minister, would you like to present your statement?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You're right here.
Mr. Speaker, March is Social Work Month, and the 2023 theme set by the U.S. National Association of Social Workers is Social Work Breaks Barriers. This theme highlights and proclaims how social work breaks the barriers that prevent people and communities from thriving, using advocacy and services to remove obstacles for persons who are in need. Mr. Speaker, I rise this morning to share with my honorable colleagues that in recognition of Social Work Month and keeping with this theme, the Department of Child and Family Services held a 3-day conference this week for their staff, which commenced on Wednesday, March 22nd, using an adaptive theme, Breaking Barriers Beyond the Trauma. The conference will equip DCFS staff with both instructive and practical tools that will steer their thinking towards becoming more trauma-informed and trauma-responsive with the intent of breaking barriers of resistance. Mr. Speaker, I was delighted to officially open the 3-day conference on Wednesday morning, the first of its kind for the department, and welcome the DCFS staff and invited guests. The conference offered a dynamic lineup of overseas and local presenters who engaged and challenged the DCFS team to work differently as social workers when lending support to children who have endured painful experiences. Staff were encouraged to develop a trauma-informed lens and be positioned to provide the relevant services at every level to support our children who have been traumatized in any way. Mr. Speaker, our children's experience all types of trauma in life. The Bermuda Adverse Childhood Experiences, ACE study, undertaken by the Bermuda Health Council in 2018, revealed that there were 13 adverse childhood experiences of both children and adults comprising of trauma and chronic disease. So what is trauma? A person may experience trauma as a response to any event they find physically or emotionally threatening or harmful. According to Bermuda's ACE study, trauma could stem from experiences such as emotional or sexual abuse, road traffic accidents, physical or emotional neglect, racism, poverty, mental health, parental separation, domestic violence, incarcerated relatives, or substance abuse. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, trauma can have long-term effects on children's well-being in that they may feel overwhelmed, helpless, sad, fearful, shocked, or have difficulty processing their experiences. Mr. Speaker, it is within this context that a high caliber of professional psychologists and social workers were invited to the Breaking Barriers Beyond the Trauma conference this week to impart their expertise through training and sharing of the impact and effective treatment of some of these traumatic experiences our children go through. Mr. Speaker, the keynote speaker for the conference was Dr. Dr. Ebony Webb, a clinical psychologist based in Tennessee, United States. Dr. Webb, a specialist in dialectical behavior therapy, set the tone for the conference in her opening address by taking participants through a deep dive into understanding the root of trauma. She shared how trauma is transferred generationally, and if not treated, adults can live out of their trauma and pass it along to their children. Dr. Webb emphasized the importance of breaking barriers early so that patterns in our lives are not repeated. She also shared how trauma is a thief and treatment must be multifaceted to include top-down and bottom-up processing techniques. Mr. Speaker, other overseas guests who presented at the conference were Ms. Kiva Harper, a licensed clinical social work specialist in trauma-focused psychotherapy and assistant professor in the practice in the School of Social Work at the University of Texas, and Mr. Hanif Benjamin, a clinical traumatologist and clinical therapist, also president of the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Social Workers. Mr. Speaker, our very own Bermudian raised presenters included Dr. Kelly Savory, a trauma and counseling psychologist and a cognitive analyst therapist who currently practices in the UK. Dr. Jana Otterbridge, a counseling psychologist and owner of Mayvera Wellness. Dr. Terralyn Tyrrell, coordinator of the Child Development Program in the Department of Education and former senior director in Government Affairs and Policy, Voices for America's Children. Dr. Jennifer LePage Hamal, clinical psychologist at the Child Development Program in the Department of Education, and Ms. Latoya Bridgewater, yoga expert and owner of Empowered Me Wellness. The presenters offered a cross-section of trauma labs covering domestic violence and safety, working with trauma-related hurt, the impact of prenatal stress and postnatal trauma on child development, understanding emotional disturbances in youth and adolescents, helping young people understand and regulate their survival responses, children who experience trauma, caregiving for residential care facilities, and self-care in the workplace. Mr. Speaker, there are just over 100 staff in the Department of Child and Family Services. The majority either are trained social workers, social work assistants, residential care officers, or officers and administrative staff who work very closely with social workers. I am pleased that all were able to participate in the 3-day conference as the trauma labs were offered on a rotational basis each day. Mr. Speaker, I commend our very own clinical manager at the Department of Child and Family Services, Dr. Zena Zuhl, the visionary for Breaking Barriers Beyond the Trauma Conference, and heartfelt thanks to the Solution Focused Advocacy Committee, who worked diligently as a team to bring the vision to life. Maureen True, Terry Lynn Richardson, Anisha Peets, Simone Romaine, and Shadrina Hassel. Well done, team. I also extend my sincere thanks to the Director of Child and Family Services, Mr. Alfred Mabry, and his senior management team for their leadership and for ensuring that all staff were able to participate and glean from the wealth of information presented at the conference. I believe their toolboxes have been expanded with new and improved methods and techniques to lend greater effective support to help Bermuda's children who are placed under the Director's care. Mr. Speaker, in closing, allow me to reiterate sentiments I have expressed before in this House, this honorable House. The staff at the Department of Child and Family Services are hard workers and have a deep commitment to the children and families of Bermuda. While it may seem to be the most thankless professional work, the impact each staff member has when assisting those they come in contact with is priceless. I'm very much grateful that they do not hold back from functioning in their various gifts and callings. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister, for the statement. The second statement is also, your following statement is also yours. But before we ask you to present your statement, I just want to acknowledge in our gallery that we have visitors from Paget Primary, P4, Ms. Smith's class, and they're here. Yeah. They're here this morning as part of a follow-up to the Black History exhibit that they done in February, where they honored the speaker as their honoree for their classroom that year. And as a follow-up, they asked, could we be able to come and see us in action here as we sit in one of our sessions? So they're here today to join us for a little while this morning before they return back to school. So we're pleased to have you, Mrs. Smith, and to all your young students. I hope you enjoy your time here with us this morning. And members, just remember that they're in the house. Minister Ferbert?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is with great pleasure that I rise this morning to share with my honorable colleagues the government's 5-year national plan for adults with intellectual disabilities 2023 to 2028. This is a first for Bermuda. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, this 5-year plan has been transposed into an accessible version, a direct reflection of the government's plan, not just to develop a plan and implement it, but to be inclusive so that persons with intellectual disabilities are involved in the implementation of the national plan. This is truly exciting work. Mr. Speaker, the month of March is celebrated as Intellectual Developmental Disability Awareness Month in Bermuda. Last week, Friday, March 17th, I joined with the students and staff of the Dame Marjorie Bean Hope Academy in a walk, ride, roll annual event held at the National Stadium Northfield to educate Bermuda about Dame Marjorie Bean Hope Academy School and students. The principal and her team adopted and adapted the U.S. recognition of this month to reflect the unique profile of the students served at the school. The event was satisfying to see our students with disabilities enjoying themselves and engaging in the fun event. Mr. Speaker, also in recognition of the significance of this month, yesterday I held a press conference to announce the launch of the National Plan for Adults with Intellectual Disabilities and their families. In attendance were some of the members of the Planning Committee for the development of this plan, who was represented Tomorrow's Voices, WinReach, Mid-Atlantic Wellness Institute, Dame Marjorie Bean Hope Academy, Aging and Disability Services, K. Margaret Carter Center, and the Disability Advisory Council. Mr. Speaker, this 5-year plan, also referred to as the National ID Plan for Adults, aims to ensure the well-being of adults with intellectual disabilities and their families through a coordinated approach of activities. Mr. Speaker, let me take this opportunity to give a better understanding of intellectual disabilities. The Special Olympics website states there are many kinds of intellectual disabilities and many causes. Intellectual disability is the most common developmental disability. According to the American Association of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, intellectual disability is a condition characterized by significant limitations in both intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior that originates before the age of 22. Intellectual functioning refers to the general mental capacity, such as learning, reasoning, and problem solving. Generally, an IQ test score of around 70 or as high as 75 indicates a significant limitation in intellectual functioning. Additionally, adaptive behavior refers to significant limitations in 2 or more adaptive areas or skills needed to live, work, and play in the community, such as communications or self-care. And Mr. Speaker, persons with intellectual disabilities can have a wide range of needs due to cognitive challenges, but they may also have many strengths. It is estimated that there are 500 Bermudians with an intellectual disabilities, with over 400 of these persons, or 80%, who are 18 years or older. Therefore, based on this, as our children with intellectual disabilities grow in age out of existing services, it is essential that as a country we appropriately plan for and support their ability to thrive as adults in the community as they age. The intent of the National ID Plan is to empower adults with intellectual disabilities and their families to ensure they live happy, healthy lives. Mr. Speaker, at the heart of the National ID Plan and its priorities are adults with intellectual disabilities and their families. This means, as a community, we cannot simply acknowledge and do for this population group, but we must actually listen and do with them. To make this happen, the accessible version of the National ID Plan will be used to enact the principles of rights, independence, choice, and inclusion that it is based upon. Mr. Speaker, to achieve its purpose, the National ID Plan has 5 key priority areas and objectives. These are quality support and services to ensure high-quality person-centered supports for adults with disabilities and their families are readily available. 2, training and education for support workers to ensure informal carers and staff who support adults with disabilities and their families are well trained and can access specialist advice easily. Policy, regulation, and accountability to ensure a legislative framework, policies, and governance arrangements are in place to guarantee the protection of adults with intellectual disabilities, monitor the effectiveness of the plan, and oversight of matters that impact their lives. Financing to ensure services and public funds are well managed and public finances are effectively used, that families have access to the financial help to which they are entitled and can access the services they require, that health insurance benefits are used effectively to fund care, and financial incentives are in place to care for loved ones at home. Advocacy and communication to ensure family carers and adults with intellectual disabilities are empowered to influence how services are developed and managed, and to ensure accountability of services to adults with disabilities. Mr. Speaker, the next steps for the plan is implementation. The Ministry of Social Development and Seniors is establishing a cross-ministry and sector governance steering committee that will oversee the implementation of annual action plans to ensure accountable and coordinated activities by identified working groups that are committed to keep adults with intellectual disabilities and their families at the center. This includes having representation and input from persons with intellectual disabilities and their families at all levels of implementation and the governance process. Mr. Speaker, the creation of the National ID Plan for Adults was spearheaded by the Mid-Atlantic Wellness Institute in partnership with the Ministry of Social Development and Seniors. This leadership was supported by a dedicated cross-sector planning committee who collaborated their professional and technical skills to develop a comprehensive national ID plan. I extend my gratitude to the members of the committee for the time invested, the dedication, and the passionate energy they displayed to see this plan fully completed. Ms. Marissa Rogers, Mid-Atlantic Wellness Institute, Ms. Kiuna Balbuda, Aging and Disability Services, Ms. Sarah Delacio, Aging and Disability Services, Ms. Jennifer Howard, K. Margaret Carter Center, Ms. Veronica Baptista, former administrator at the K. Margaret Carter Center, Ms. Julie Lynn, school social worker at Hope Academy, Dr. Alec Bush, clinical psychologist, Mid-Atlantic Wellness Institute, Intellectual Disability Services, Ms. Tina Nash, Winreach, Ms. Margaret Phillips, Dame Marjorie Bean, Hope Academy, Ms. Thea Ferbert, Tomorrow's Voices and Parent, Ms. Tony Bridgewater, Community Advocate, and Mr. Jose Lopez, Parent and Community Advocate. I also, Mr. Speaker, I extend thanks to all the stakeholders and general public who participated in the public consultation and meetings that were held. The input and feedback obtained from them helped to ensure the plan was well informed. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I must emphasize that although intellectual and developmental disabilities is recognized in Bermuda during the month of March, as a community, we must maintain this focus and awareness throughout the year, as there is much work to do to create and become a more inclusive society. The National ID Plan for Adults with Intellectual Disabilities is one of the key means to help achieve such. The 5-year plan is another step towards advancing the country to better align with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in anticipation that it will be extended to Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, I encourage our community to become familiar with the National ID Plan for Adults, which can be found on the Ministry of Social Development and Seniors homepage website located on www.gov.bm. Bermuda, I look forward to your support of our adults with disabilities by staying engaged with initiatives that will evolve out of the National ID Plan. In this way, you can be a part of the change in making Bermuda more inclusive. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Members, the next statement this morning is in the name of the Minister of Transport. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The title of the ministerial statement is Bermuda Transportation System Ready to Welcome Visitors. Mr. Speaker, General Powell said, "There are no secrets to success. It is the result of preparation and hard work and learning from failure." Mr. Speaker, preparation and hard work is what we at the Ministry of Transport Department of Marine and Ports, and the Department of Public Transportation have been doing to get us ready for this season. We are prepared for whatever confronts us. We have listened to our stakeholder partners, and although we can't do everything on everyone's wish list, we will be delivering more traffic enforcement in the east and Horseshoe Bay Beach, more minibuses, pushing for more on the road taxis, and supplemental ferry service around cruise ships' arrival this season. Mr. Speaker, honorable members will be aware of the original forecast for arrivals of 224 calls the 2023 calendar year. Unfortunately, due to weather events this January, February, and March, Norwegian Cruise Lines was unable to call into Bermuda on their way south on 10 occasions. One call in April, the Vasco da Gama, was removed for scheduling purposes, leaving 213 calls on the schedule. Bermuda's traditional cruise season starts in mid-April and runs through October. Bermuda did receive 7 cruise calls this quarter, and if the weather is agreeable, there are 6 more calls scheduled in March. Mr. Speaker, it is important to reiterate my previous remarks on the subject of daily passenger arrival numbers. 2023 will see an increase in calls in April, October, November, and December, and ships are coming almost 7 days a week. And this ensures that passenger volume is spread more evenly throughout the week and year. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Transport is working to ensure a viable transportation system. The availability of reliable and efficient public transportation is vital to the economy. Our community's quality of life and the business experience demand of a premier destination. Seamless movement of people is essential for work, school, or leisure activities. The Ministry of Transport is committed to improving the quality of public transportation service across the island. Our goal is to ensure our transportation system is safe, reliable, and environmentally sustainable. Mr. Speaker, one of the most significant achievements and improvements to date in our transportation system is the successful introduction of the first 30 electric buses. The first 10 of the 30 entered service on April 13, 2022. The benefits of electric public buses in Bermuda are numerous. Electric buses produce no harmful emissions, reducing the island's carbon footprint and improving air quality. They are also quieter and smoother, providing a more comfortable ride for passengers. In addition, electric buses require less maintenance than traditional diesel buses, resulting in lower operating costs and longer lifespans. Mr. Speaker, we in the ministry eagerly await the landing of 40 new buses in July 2023. With an electric bus fleet totaling 70 buses, with some of the older still viable models will be sufficient to provide for the full bus schedule, which requires 88 buses in service. There will be more capacity and use of public buses for the school runs, freeing up the service of the minibuses that currently provide the services to the schools. Most importantly, Mr. Speaker, we will also see significantly less bus routes cancellation due to a more reliable service. Mr. Speaker, in addition to these improvements, the ministry has been working on several other initiatives to enhance their overall transportation service in Bermuda. The shared ride taxi model operated at the Al-Afbade Airport is not working as efficiently as intended, and therefore there will be changes made to the system. Passengers at the airport will have the option of shared ride in advance of selecting their transportation source. This will encourage passengers to use shared ride, which is less expensive transportation option, and when used, it corrects transport capacity in the system. Mr. Speaker, with the increased cruise passengers foot traffic and the increased demand for public service vehicles, particularly in Dockyard, Horseshoe Bay Beach, and St. George's areas, the ministry is dedicating traffic officers at Horseshoe Bay Beach and St. George's. Dockyard has its own dedicated officers and system, which has worked well over the years. This initiative will ensure a safer, smoother, and overall better experience for the visitors to source transportation while on vacation in Bermuda. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, I set out the recent budget debate. The Department of Marine and Service has increased budget of $2.3 million for 23-24 fiscal year. The increase represents the government's commitment to providing a sustainable transportation system. Due to the heavy cruise ship season, we must ensure the ferries, the pilot boats, the line boats, and the tugboats, etc., are prepared to handle the load, plus continue the reliable service to residents. The department has worked diligently to prepare for the busy season and has the funding to deliver on the plans made for the season. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Transport remains committed to improving public transportation service across the island. We recognize the critical role that public transportation plays in our society. We are determined to provide a safe, reliable, and sustainable transportation system for all. The ministry will continue to work with stakeholders in the transportation industry and other government agencies to develop and implement new initiatives and programs aimed at improving public transportation service in Bermuda. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Members, the next statement this morning is in the name of the Minister of National Security. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning to you and colleagues. Mr. Speaker, I would like to provide this honorable House with an update on the Bermuda Fire and Rescue Service. Mr. Speaker, the honorable members will recall that this honorable House passed the Fire Safety Amendment Act 2022 on March 3rd, 2023. On that occasion, I informed honorable members that the purpose of the bill was to amend the Fire Safety Act 2014 to clarify that the National Fire Protection Agency codes do not apply to airport operations, and that the UK Air Navigation Overseas Territories orders and any overseas territories aviation requirements do apply to airport operations. The Fire Safety Act 2014 was always intended to specifically address building safety and not technical firefighting and rescue operations. The 2022 amendment bill became necessary to provide clarity on the matter and has supported the Ministry of National Security and the Bermuda Fire and Rescue Service's aim of definitively setting the minimum duty strength and resourcing requirements for the airport rescue firefighting service at the Aleph Wade International Airport. Mr. Speaker, in a statement made to this honorable House on July 1st, 2022, I advised honorable members and the listening public that a February 2022 Skyport audit of the airport rescue firefighting service had raised the minimum duty strength requirements. A review of the audit was subsequently commissioned, and the agreed minimum strength is now 12 firefighters per shift. This is an increase of 7 per shift over the 5 firefighters that were previously required. With the fire service already understaffed, meeting the new requirements in order to keep the airport open and able to accept flights put an immediate and significant strain on the fire service. Mr. Speaker, the public has been kept fully informed of the measures taken to secure adequate and qualified firefighters for the airport fire service in order to meet the new minimum strength requirements. Experienced airport rescue firefighters from overseas have been temporarily contracted to bolster the staff numbers at the airport. Simultaneously, the Bermuda Fire and Rescue Service recruited 11 new firefighters, 10 of whom have completed training in the United Kingdom and are now certified airport rescue firefighters. These new firefighters have replaced 10 of the overseas contracted firefighters and are now working alongside the remaining contracted and permanent firefighters at the airport. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to report that the 2023-2024 budget for the Bermuda Fire and Rescue Service includes funding for the recruitment of 24 additional firefighters and advertisements seeking applicants for the available positions closed on March 1st. The Bermuda Fire and Rescue Service accepted 250 of the 281 applications received. These applicants will be put through a series of written and physical testing, psychological tests, background checks, vetting, and interviews to identify the 24 most suitable candidates. Mr. Speaker, the Bermuda Fire and Rescue Service aims to have the new recruits on board by July 1st. Following their initial 2 weeks of onboarding and local training, the new recruits will travel to the United Kingdom to undergo 6 weeks of training and certification for airport rescue firefighting. It is anticipated that the training will be completed by the end of August 2023, allowing the newly trained firefighters to relieve the remaining overseas contracted firefighters. Mr. Speaker, I again wish to express my gratitude to the contracted firefighters who answered our call for assistance. Their work with the Bermuda Fire and Rescue Service and the Airport Rescue Firefighting Service has ensured that the airport remained open and well prepared to provide a fire or rescue response if necessary. Honorable members and the listening public will recall that the overseas firefighters were contracted at a time when there were no additional trained airport rescue firefighters available locally. The sudden increase in the required minimum duty strength meant that resources needed to be made available immediately. Had the overseas firefighters not answered the call, there was a significant risk of the LFA losing its Category 9 rating, thereby prohibiting landing of the size of aircraft used by regularly scheduled commercial and cargo flights. Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that the overseas contracted firefighters have always been a temporary measure. I look forward to welcoming the new recruits to the Bermuda Fire and Rescue Service, who will provide a long-term solution. I have every confidence that following their training, both locally and overseas, the successful men and women will be aptly prepared to assume the very important work of ensuring that our airport remains open and rated safe to accept all scheduled flights. Adequate and well-trained firefighters at the LFB International Airport are a priority of the Bermuda Fire and Rescue Service and the Ministry of National Security. We are working together to keep Bermuda safe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Members, the next statement this morning is in the name of the Minister of Health. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and honorable members, the first strategic principle of the Bermuda Health Strategy 2022-2027 is promoting healthy living and preventative care. As we strive for a healthier Bermuda, living a healthy lifestyle and taking steps to prevent the onset of illness are essential actions in our personal journey towards better health and key to improving our population's health. Mr. Speaker, as I've stated in this House last year, health system change is complex, but our goals are clear. It bears repeating that we must achieve better health outcomes, particularly chronic disease management and mental well-being. We must ensure the availability of essential health services that residents can be confident that they can afford when they need them, and we must strive to be efficient and effective in delivering these services and eliminate waste and duplication in the health system. Mr. Speaker, as we continue our multi-year journey to deliver on this government's promise to implement universal health coverage for all residents, I want to take this opportunity to focus on our own individual roles in the health system transformation that lies ahead of us. Many of us think of our health system as comprising the treatments we receive from doctors, dentists, nurses, physiotherapists, pharmacists, and other allied health professionals, as well as the services provided at the hospitals, health centers, clinics, and laboratories. We think of our health as a product of these health system services, perhaps with an added measure of genetics. But our individual health is more than that, Mr. Speaker. Arguably, our health is largely created through actions outside the health sector. The conditions in which we are born, grow, live, work, and age are fundamentally connected to our physical and mental well-being. While we may not be able to control all of these conditions of life, we can make individual choices decisions which collectively foster health transformation at a personal level and at a community level. Mr. Speaker, what is required by the entire Bermuda community, though, is a paradigm shift in our thinking about health and well-being, and especially our role in the change we want to see. As I announced at the beginning of this month, the Department of Health is focused on promoting good health and will be spearheading the Commit to Change campaign this year. The campaign's goal is to encourage residents to make small commitments towards healthy living. Change is tough and failure can be demoralizing, so we will be asking you to just make one change at a time. These changes do not need to be big, but they do need to be consistent. Small steps help us create valuable habits, and good habits create change. Mr. Speaker, we all know a healthy diet and regular exercise are good habits. You do not need me to tell you that. However, when you do commit to change, just drink a glass of water instead of soda. This is a small step. Park your car or bike 3 streets away from the shop that you plan to visit, or walk to it. That is another small step. Other good habits include a good night's sleep, making time to be mindful, learning something new, and having breakfast. Mr. Speaker, when you notice a friend, family member, or colleague making one small change, we shouldn't tease them. Instead, we should support them, or better yet, join them. And these small steps matter, as they do make a difference. Another adjustment we can make in our lives is to ensure that we get our annual physical, and for women, our yearly mammograms as recommended by our doctors. We can be proactive about our health status. If we can prevent illness and injury in the first place, we can reduce cost in the health system. If we cannot prevent illness, at least we may receive treatment early enough to produce a good result and decrease, if not eliminate, complications later in life. Mr. Speaker, a key change in our approach to health and well-being would be our use of the emergency department at KEMH. Many people view the care received from the dedicated staff at the emergency department as free. It is not free. It is paid for through a combination of our tax dollars and a portion of the health insurance premium of every insured person. As honorable members will be aware, emergency department treatment is one of the most expensive ways to receive medical care, and using it for regular care drives up costs in the health system for all of us. The change you can make is to stop and first ask yourself if your GP can help. Perhaps you can wait until the next day to see your GP. And if you are a GP, does that patient absolutely require the type of urgent medical care that the emergency team provides? We recognize these can be difficult decisions, and particularly for those who are underinsured and uninsured, the emergency department can be viewed as a viable option. A revamp of our healthcare system is necessary to help all residents access care more appropriately, ensure we as a community make the best use of our vital hospital resources, and deliver better value care for all of us. Mr. Speaker, change is a developmental process, and it occurs on a gradient ranging from incremental improvements to transformation. We all have a role to play in the health system transformation, and each step matters. Universal health coverage, or UHC, is a vital part of the change we need to see, and this government remains committed to its implementation. The Ministry of Health, along with key partners in the private and public sectors, have made progress with projects that are priority, which are fundamental for the UHC. One such project is Bermuda's first Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, or JSNA. To manage the island's healthcare system transformation within our financial constraints, as a starting point, Mr. Speaker, we need to know what our priority health needs are, including both physical and mental health. Honorable members will recall my statement last November, which spoke to a strategic principle of the Bermuda Health Strategy, namely understanding our population's health needs. With the vital support and superb work of public registrars in training with the UK Health and Safety Agency, along with resources kindly provided to us by the Department of Statistics, Bermuda's first JSNA is nearing completion, and I thank them for their incredible efforts. The JSNA will provide a baseline of information on our population's health, and it comprises a review of the following areas. 1, Bermuda's population profile and the social determinants of health. 2, health behaviors and risk factors. 3, causes of ill health and death. 4, vulnerable groups, including children, the elderly, and people with disabilities. And 5, healthcare services. The JSNA's key findings on Bermuda's population profile and wider determinants of health indicate the island's population looks set to decrease size, increase in age, and continue to be characterized by multi-social economic inequities. While this may not be new information, all these conditions will impact health and health care. As stated in the Bermuda Health Strategy, healthcare strengthening has a 10 to 15-year horizon, and it is important to be able to measure our progress. We must know our starting point, as we can only manage what we can measure. We expect completion of the JSNA in early April, and I look forward to publication shortly thereafter. Mr. Speaker, another strategic principle of the Bermuda Health Strategy is harnessing healthcare technology. As noted in that strategy, technology can help improve access to physical and mental health care services. This can also improve how health care is delivered and how outcomes can be measured and monitored. In undertaking the evidence of developing the Bermuda National Health Digital Strategy, a working group set up in October last year aimed to establish a system-wide vision and integrated digital healthcare strategy. Digital health innovation is more than electronic medical records. This form of health innovation has the potential to be a key enabler in the transformation of Bermuda's healthcare system. The working group comprises doctors, insurers, representatives of BHB and the Bermuda Health Council, as well as relevant government departments, and they've met bi-weekly, then weekly since October. In that time, it has engaged Edinburgh Innovations and Interactive Health and collaborations with KPMG to produce a digital health assessment of the workforce and a digital health assessment of the community, respectively. The aim is to complete the National Digital Health Strategy in April, with publication in due course after that. I want to take this opportunity to thank all the members of the National Digital Health Strategy Working Group for their very hard work in getting to this point. In particular, the efforts of Kirsten Beasley, who chairs the group, and Lori Marshall, who's the project manager, have been invaluable in the process and the progress that's been made to date. Mr. Speaker, the JSNA and the National Digital Health Strategy are vital, foundational pieces of work that will guide decision-making into the future, and I look forward to sharing their full findings and recommendations with this honorable House. Mr. Speaker, the UHC program of work also includes an examination of our integrated care pathways, and that work is underway as well. The purpose is to review and understand care needs and care provisions so that we can identify any potential improvements. With a deep understanding of a patient's journey along a care pathway, it is possible to design a more integrated service model to improve the patient experience, clinical outcomes, and operational performance. The initial care pathways being examined are the first 1,000 days of life, and Dr. Sylvanus Nawab as the clinical lead, chronic kidney disease, and adult acute mental health with Dr. Anna Nielsen Williams as the clinical lead. The clinical lead for the kidney disease pathway is still to come. Mr. Speaker, these integrated care pathways reflect another strategic principle of the Bermuda Health Strategy, namely partnerships and collaborative working. As outlined in the strategy, understanding and defining more integrated care pathways between providers and individuals will increase the quality, affordability, and efficiency of care. It will also strengthen the health system by defining standards and promoting and disseminating best practice. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I would like to provide honorable members with an update on the drug formulary. Controlling the cost of pharmaceuticals is a critical part of our health system's financial reform. Our high cost of healthcare as an aging population and increasing incidence of chronic diseases such as diabetes all contribute to the burden felt by many in the community. Science continues to give us new medicines and treatments for managing our health, but it is clear people are concerned about the price that they have to pay for these medicines. Clinically, pharmaceuticals are medications which are the most effective non-behavioral intervention for non-communicable diseases. And pharmaceutical intervention saves money and interrupts the cost and burden of disease progression by doing so with efficiency, and this does require cost control. The Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee is up and running and advises the Health Council on the drug formulary where prices will be regulated. The purpose is not to control the price of every medication sold in Bermuda, but rather the Bermuda Drug Formulary will comprise the list of common essential medications along with associated products and devices used in medical treatments, which are intended to be medically appropriate, cost-effective, and sold at a regulated price. So far, the Health Council has placed 2 COVID antiviral drugs on the formulary, and they are priced at $30. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the committee met this week and approved 4 diabetes medications to be added to the formulary. The committee will deliberate on 2 more diabetes medications very shortly, and the Health Council anticipates publication of the group of diabetes medications by the end of next week. The next group to be considered is insulin, followed by cardiovascular medications. The public is invited to check the Bermuda Health Council's website for updates as they happen. Mr. Speaker, as we seek to answer the question, what does it take to be healthy and stay healthy, not just get healthy, we strongly encourage everyone to execute on those small steps and small changes which are within your control and create good habits. This is within our ability, and that is our personal responsibility. The paradigm shift shift in our thinking about things like our use of hospital resources, frankly, is very necessary, and Bermuda must revamp its healthcare system, and we all have roles to play. The ministry's commitment to providing the support that we can through our public health services is unwavering, and this government's commitment to healthcare transformation is resolute. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Members, the next statement this morning is in the name of the Minister of Works. Minister?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Morning.
Mr. Speaker, I have today as Minister with responsibility for housing the pleasure of tabling the most recent audited financial statements for the Bermuda Housing Trust, the statutory body charged with providing seniors in Bermuda with the most affordable rental accommodation possible. I'm pleased to note for the information of members that the trust is current in its annual audits and that it is another clean, unqualified audit for the trust. And further, that the audited statements show that the trust remains in a relatively strong financial position, notwithstanding the challenges it faces. Mr. Speaker, a word about those challenges. Like most organizations in Bermuda, and indeed throughout the world, the trust had to wrestle with the COVID pandemic and the impact it had on its day-to-day operations. It was at times a struggle for the trust, as it was for so many other charities in the island. In particular, maintenance of its 5 properties fell behind during this period, and the trust is now having to play catch-up. This is critical for aging properties which serve as home for close to 200 seniors. Some of these properties date back as much as 50 years, and maintenance can often involve major work to ensure they are brought up to code. This is not inexpensive, and here the Ministry of Public Works continues to assist where it can when called upon by the trust. Simply put, Mr. Speaker, and as I have said numerous times before in this Honorable House, maintenance costs have been steadily increasing and are not predicted to go down anytime soon. Meanwhile, the trust continues to stick with its long-standing policy of not raising rents on sitting tenants, which remains a source of comfort and reassurance to their senior residents in the times of ever-increasing costs. Mr. Speaker, the Bermuda Housing Trust is for seniors who are capable of independent living, i.e. capable of living on their own. All residents typically go in with that capability. However, we all understand and appreciate that aging over time brings challenges which makes living independently difficult. We endeavor to work with our seniors and their families to come up with a solution that meets their needs. That is not as easy as it sounds. The trust understands and appreciates that seniors want to maintain their independence and dignity to the end. Generally, we also find that they do not want to be a burden to their families, and if they can, want to avoid ending up in a rest home. In any event, with respect to the latter, there are limited spaces which presents yet another problem for seniors, their families, and government. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, members will see that the trust remains committed to paying off a substantial loan, a $12.5 million loan that was taken out in 2006 with HSBC to construct the Dr. Camp Park in Southampton, 5 blocks totaling approximately 100 units. The audited statements show that this loan now stands at just under $4 million, which is good news, the terms of which require that it be renegotiated this year. The Trust's hope is that the HSBC Bank will do its charitable best to continue to extend the favorable terms. Mr. Speaker, I'm aware too that the COVID experience was also a learning experience for the Trust, again, as it was for so many other organizations in Bermuda. It highlighted some of the deficiencies to what is essentially a volunteer charitable organization, running as it is with but one full-time employee and a couple of part-timers. While that overhead may have been good for the bottom line, it has also made difficult and challenging the Trust's mission of serving its client seniors. The trust responded by re-examining its organization and its operations, all with a view to minimizing, if not eliminating, its weaknesses and maximizing its strengths. Some of these involved observations that the Office of the Auditor General has been making in their annual reports, annual audits of the trust these past few years. Mr. Speaker, the Bermuda Housing Trust therefore now finds itself in a period of transition, and we can all appreciate how difficult that can be at times for the trustees, for staff, for the volunteers, and for the residents. But I'm confident that they are on the right track here, and I'm assured that their senior residents will not suffer as the trust undergoes these internal changes. Indeed, I believe that seniors will in the end be better served, which after all is the purpose of the trust in the first place. Mr. Speaker and honorable members, what is noteworthy is that the work is overseen and sometimes done by trustees who are essentially volunteers, who give of their time freely and for the small stipend they are paid for meetings. The demand on their time also increases as the demand for higher standards increase for better internal governance. I want to thank those who continue to serve. It is most welcomed and appreciated. Here I should like to thank two members in particular who stepped down this past year, one of whom is our colleague here in the House and in Cabinet, the Honorable Vance Campbell, JPMP, who upon appointment as a minister retired after nearly 15 years of service to the trust and who had been serving as deputy chair. I'm informed that his contributions and his talents, especially in the area of maintenance, are sorely missed. The other is Mrs. Scott Stewart, who stepped down after close to 10 years of service. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to thank both the Trust Chairperson, Mr. John Barrett, and Deputy Chairperson, Mrs. Rochelle Simons, whom after 10 years of service continue to work diligently to guide the Trust's work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Members, the next statement is also in the name of Minister of Works. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Minister with responsibility for the West End Development Corporation, more colloquially known as WEDCO, I have the privilege to lay before this Honorable House the Corporation's annual report for the year 2021. Mr. Speaker, the 2020-2021 financial year was unprecedented. COVID-19 was ubiquitous. Protective measures were put in place, lockdowns, shelter-in-place orders, and alphabetical days for groceries, all in the name of protecting not only our healthcare system, but our family, friends, and neighbors. Though some may say the government went too far, and others may say the government did not go far enough during this time, well, what can be said is that each and every one of us was impacted, be it individual or business. An impact that WEDCO felt as reflected in this annual report that is before honorable members today. Mr. Speaker, this 2021 annual report details significant financial challenges arising from the global COVID-19 pandemic that began in March of 2020. WEDCO's business model is heavily reliant on the tourism industry, in particular the cruise market, and with the ceasing of visitor arrivals, the pandemic hit the corporation exceptionally hard. As the 2020 calendar year progressed, it became apparent that the impact of the pandemic necessitated budgetary revisions to maintain the bare essentials of the operation. Mr. Speaker, I must pause here to commend WEDCO's board led by our colleague from constituency 26, Neville Tyrrell, and management team led by General Manager Andrew Diaz, whom through these challenging times ushered in pivotal policies and decisions that not only reduced the operating expenditure of the corporation, but did so while retaining 100% of the staff by working with our union partners to implement a ban on overtime and a 10% reduction in pay for a one-year period to ensure that all employees would retain their jobs while avoiding the need to reduce staff numbers. In addition to this, management renegotiated existing service contracts and worked with service providers to reduce their scope of work. Management also deferred any discretionary plant upgrades and reduced capital expenditures, while only electing to spend on items that were deemed critical to maintaining existing reduced services. Mr. Speaker, honorable members are reminded that accompanying the primary revenue generated by visitor arrivals, Redco also has a secondary income stream through the leasing of residential and commercial properties under its remit. The protective restrictions imposed to curtail the COVID-19 pandemic, as mentioned above, had a severe impact on the commercial tenants, as many were ordered to close between April and May 2020, mainly the restaurants and nightlife. Though a phased approach to reopening began in early June, the lack of air and cruise arrivals compounded by rising inflation rates for products caused unprecedented strain on business owners. Therefore, to alleviate this pressure, management allowed a 3-month deferral for rent payments. When it became apparent that this would not suffice, Redco created a COVID concession policy, overhauled the budget, and asked tenants to contact staff for help if required. Many tenants availed themselves of this process, which brought much-needed reassurance throughout the uncertain times. Although, Mr. Speaker, these concessions did indeed bring stability to tenants, Redco itself was forced to absorb the loss in revenue as reflected in this report. The fiscal year 2020-21 saw the corporation's rental revenue reduced by $2.5 million, dock revenues decreasing by $3 million, along with associated revenue shortfalls in sources such as water and sewage. In addition, the corporation's net receivables were reduced to $1.25 million from $1.6 million. Mr. Speaker, to protect the organization from insolvency, management reduced expenses by $4 million, while the government provided an operation grant of $1.25 million. With this taken into account, fortunately, the corporation was able to decrease its long-term debt by $1.4 million. Again, this is amazing work for such unprecedented times, and credit must be given when due. It is evident the corporation had a challenging year in 2020-21 fiscal year as it sought to maintain operational solvency while still servicing the needs of tenants and other stakeholders. Although through this economic strife, Redco was able to complete various emergency infrastructure repairs to Tipner House, Dockyard Terrace Number 9, and Sail Loft Tank Interior Wall, amongst others. The corporation was ever mindful of cost containment as it strived to maintain and increase revenues despite the economic climate. Mr. Speaker, at present, efforts remain on target to ensure the West End is Bermuda's premier destination and entertainment port. Redco continues to develop strategic partnerships within both the private and public sectors to ensure the sustainability of the corporation as it moves forward with its development initiatives, inclusive of the previously announced amalgamation with the Bermuda Land Development Company, with the ultimate goal of becoming fully self-sufficient again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Members, the next statement is also in the name of the Minister of Works. Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to provide this honorable House and the people of Bermuda with yet another report on the state of the island's roads and the various ongoing trenching projects, and a look forward on what to expect. Let me first say that I am well aware of the state of our roads as a daily user of them and a regular receiver of public complaints. I too am quite weary of the work that is being carried out and the time it is taking. I constantly remind myself, though, while sitting at a stoplight, that I like having reliable electricity. So I'll endure till the end. Mr. Speaker, colleagues are reminded of my multiple previous statements in February 2020, March and November 2022, in which I advised and updated the Bermuda public on the following. 1, Balco's $250 million capital plan, part of which is the major improvements to their underground high voltage system, that will serve all their customers into the future with more reliable, safe, and cost-effective electricity. This project is expected to last 36 months. And two, the concurrent Ministry of Public Works initiative under the Water and Wastewater Master Plan that sees the installing of new water and sewage mains and telecommunication conduits in Southside St. David's and the town of St. George's. Now that beyond March 2023, it is clear that the original timeline, which was set in 2020 of 36 months, will be exceeded. No one needs to ask why the delay, Mr. Speaker. Simply put, what was declared in March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic, the timeline essentially will be doubled. Government moved immediately to protect our citizens by instituting protective measures to ensure our healthcare system could be maintained. In turn, almost all ongoing and scheduled construction projects were either halted, postponed, or canceled, as worldwide the industry began to suffer from supply chain issues while attempting to grapple with the economic fallout resulting from the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, as the cost of supplies, materials, and equipment have risen and continue to rise in Bermuda, BELCO, the ministry, and industry partners have been experiencing issues in the sourcing of materials and personnel for these two initiatives, therefore slowing progress. Now, this does not mean that work is not being completed. For example, in my November 2022 statement in this Honorable House, I advised that under these initiatives, 2 of the 10 projects were completed. 4 were set to be completed by the end of 2022, which I'm now pleased to say that these have now concluded. As a reminder, these 4 projects were: 1, the parking lay-by construction at Molly Bay Park in St. George's, work to the Bayless Bay Dock Rockcliffe embankment repairs in Hamilton Parish; 3, conduit trench works on North Shore Road from Barker's Hill to Store Hill; and 4, conduit trench works on Palmetto Road, leading into the railway trail near the Department of Public Transport entrance in Devonshire. As 6 projects have now concluded, 4 remain and are on schedule to be completed by the end of this year, including, but not limited to, trench work on the Middle Road in Southampton from Lighthouse Road to Evans Bay, through the roadway and railway trail that will commence in April 2023. Mr. Speaker, it's worth reminding the magnitude of this project. In the east, it began at Molly Bay Road substation to Stokes Point Road, across the water to St. David's Road, along Kinley Field Road to the airport substation, across the water again to Coney Island, along the railway trail to North Shore Road, up Fracture Street to the substation, then continuing along Fracture Street to Wilkinson Avenue, to Harrington Sound Road substation, through Devil's Hill to Flats substation, then Middle Road to Store Hill, down to North Shore Road to Palmetto Road, Parsons Lane in Devonshire, and to the Frog Lane substation. And Mr. Speaker, in the west, it began at Belmont substation on Middle Road, Warwick, to Camp Hill, then Lighthouse Hill, Middle Road to Jews Bay. That work has not concluded. It has been paused, awaiting the delivery of piping, and is expected to restart in April. Trenching will continue along Middle Road and the railway trail to the Evans Bay substation. The end of the western trenching is at Georges Bay Road, which has already been completed. Mr. Speaker, this trenching works consist of 90,000 feet or 17 miles of trenching. As you can see, this is a massive logistical undertaking that has covered virtually the entire island. The areas that have not been mentioned had their high voltage cables replaced during a previous trenching exercise. In areas that have the trench work completed, all trenches have temporary asphalt reinstated, with the exception of the ones that do not require asphalt, such as in the shoulders or railway trails. Again, like I've said before in my November 2022 statement, Mr. Speaker, and I quote, We acknowledge that these infrastructure projects have contributed to the road issues as the temporary asphalting after trenching work has been uneven. But it's just meant to be that, temporary. It has never been the intention of the government to leave our roads in this manner." End quote. In certain areas, the Ministry of Public Works has commenced with the permanent asphalting of the areas that the trenching works have been carried out, which will ultimately lead to smoother roadways. This work can be seen at the St. David's entrance, Fracture Street, Wilkinson Avenue, and the beginning of Harrington Sound Road. However, Mr. Speaker, as the ministry continues this work, we have been notified by Balco that as part of their electrical infrastructure improvements, pool holes will need to be dug every 800 feet, which will allow Balco technicians to access and connect the high voltage cable lines through the newly placed conduits. Simply put, pool holes are 8-foot wide by 30-foot long holes dug in the road to allow the connection of the cables. This process has already started on Middle Road near the Whitney Institute Middle School and will continue along the eastern route noted above all the way to the National Sports Center substation. This cable pulling process will continue until September of this year. Following the conclusion of the eastern cable pulls, the process will continue along the western route noted earlier to the Evans Bay substation. What does this mean, Mr. Speaker? Unfortunately, this means Balco will again be required to go into the roadways to excavate pool holes across the island to complete the electrical infrastructure connection. Fortunately, Balco did complete the pool hole required works for Fracture Street, Harrington Sound Road, North Shore Road, a railway trail, Coney Island, and Kinley Field Park. This allowed for the aforementioned permanent asphalting of the areas. However, Mr. Speaker, as Balco is required to complete the remaining infrastructure works, this delays the ministry's permanent asphalting initiative on most of the trenched roads. The Balco works are anticipated to occur throughout this year into 2024. Once these works conclude, including the temporary asphalting for the pool holes, the ministry will then be able to continue the permanent asphalting initiative for the relevant locations. Although it's important to note that permanent asphalting can only commence approximately 12 months after the ground settling has occurred, this time frame is ideal as it would allow for smoother layering of the asphalt, which ultimately will lead to smoother roadways. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, as Balco completes its required works, area by area, the ministry will follow with permanent paving of the roads. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to speak to road paving works that will occur this year that will be carried out by our own team as well as contracting some work to Eastern Asphalt Company so that we can accelerate the repairs. A number of areas have been identified, such as Middle Road Warwick between the former T.N. Tatum Middle School and the Marketplace in Southampton, in front of Linda's Warwick, South Shore Road near Henry's Pantry, Coral Hill near Esso Service Station, and Collectors Hill, to name some of the locations that will be addressed. Other areas can be added to the list when reported. Mr. Speaker, temporary road paving will occur in these areas to improve the driving experience until permanent paving can be carried out. The permanent paving of Harrington Sound Road will also continue. As noted in this year's budget statement and ministry debate, there has been an increase in funding for roadworks, and as such, technical officers are working diligently to solidify the 2023-2024 paving schedule. Although cost increases, supply chain issues, and unforeseen project issues continuously hinder accurate planning, colleagues will note the recent RFP issued for the provision of asphalting aggregate, which unfortunately we are having to import from overseas. We're looking at options for importing to keep costs down. Mr. Speaker, the immediate pain for the motoring public is well worth it, as when completed, these initiatives will see the protection of our freshwater supplies, protection of our electrical infrastructure, and ensuring sewage is properly disposed of for the next several years. This work safeguards the future, not just for us here today, but for our descendants also. Additionally, since we required every utility to utilize the trenching at the same time, the need to dig up the roots in the future should be minimized. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Members, the final statement this morning is also in the name of Minister who's on his feet. Minister, would you like to
Thank you, Mr.
continue?
Speaker.
Yeah, I can understand the need for that
Yeah.
water to wet the whistle.
Mm.
Have a drink and then continue. Yeah,
Mr. Speaker,
yes, his glass of water. He's having his water to continue on. Clarification on that, yes.
this government has a vision for a more efficient and effective government, especially in relation to Quangos. As such, colleagues may recall in July of last year, I stood here in this honorable house and announced the cabinet approval for the amalgamation of the West End Development Corporation, WEDCO, and the Bermuda Land Development Company, BLDC, into one new entity. From a business perspective, this made complete sense since these two Quangos share similar objectives, mandates, skills, accounting procedures, and staffing levels. Now, I know some members will be keen to know what the new company will be called. That decision has not been made as yet. The board are having those discussions. As said in my previous statement, this follows recommendations from both the October 2003 Central Policy Unit report entitled Untangling Bermuda's Quangos, a review of Quangos in the Bermuda government, and the subsequent Sage Commission report presented a decade later in 2013, and another decade later, we are making it a reality. Acting on these recommendations has been a mighty long time in coming to fruition, but I'm pleased that we are finally taking this initiative across the finish line. Mr. Speaker, this merger is a move for the future. We view these changes as an opportunity which will affect cost savings by reducing duplication of roles, combining responsibilities, and bringing a sharper focus to deliver on the government's mandate to control costs and operate more efficiently. As stated in the ministry's budget debate, we are anticipating a cost savings of $700,000 this year alone. With this being said, I'm pleased to provide a further update on the progress thus far since the July 2022 announcement. For the last 8 months, technical officers of WEDCO, BLDC, and the ministry have been working diligently to meet our deadline of January 2024. To date, the teams are set to commence negotiations with the BIU and BPSU for new identical collective bargaining agreements for both entities. Began the job description reviews and internal policy assessments. Merged the WEDCO and BLDC servers and software, essentially running all finance and IT systems for both entities from a single location. The Chief Financial Officer at WEDCO is now acting in a dual role for both entities. Compile the asset and liability schedule for both entities. Are establishing a marketing and PR joint strategy for the new entity and have relocated key staff to assist with the transition initiative. Mr. Speaker, as you can tell, a lot of work has been done already, but we still have some way to go. And that is why I'm making this statement today, to update colleagues on the transition team's activities relating to the seamless amalgamation. Mr. Speaker, as this transition is actively underway, I feel it's pertinent to provide necessary clarity on the methodology for this process and avoid any confusion going forward. Upon prior consultation with relevant stakeholders in this initiative's infancy, that is prior to the cabinet approval and subsequent July 2022 announcement, the most efficient route to follow would be that WEDCO absorbs the assets and liabilities of the BLDC. This means that as part of this initiative, the government will be bringing forth legislation to 1, amend the West End Development Corporation Act 1982 to reflect the merger, and 2, repeal the Baselands Development Act 1996, which enabled the incorporation of the BLDC. However, we are not at that point yet in the process. As aforementioned, there's still more work to be done before bringing forth these pieces of legislation. This is the first step, the dissolution of the BRDC. Mr. Speaker, the aforementioned Baselands Development Act 1996 established the BRDC as a limited liability company in accordance with the Bermuda Companies Act 1981. Therefore, to wind up the BRDC, there is a set procedure in the Companies Act that must be followed. Before this dissolution procedure can commence, Section 8B of the Baselands Act 1996 provides that unless authorized by the legislature, a member of the company, that is the BRDC, shall not procure the dissolution of the company or its amalgamation with any other person or body. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, as a member of the company, with your permission, I will be tabling a motion later today seeking approval of the legislature to begin the legal dissolution process for the company in accordance with the 1996 Act. Once the BLDC has been legally dissolved, the act can be repealed. Further steps will be taken later this year at the annual general meeting of the company, including the merging of the two boards. Mr. Speaker, this government believes in fiscal prudence. This move should not come as a shock to anyone. As I've said previously on numerous occasions, it makes no sense that on an island of only 21 square miles, that we have two organizations, two CEOs, two CFOs, and all the attendant officers, machinery, and staffs carrying out very similar functions for the most part, with the full demonstration of unnecessary bureaucracy on display. Mr. Speaker, this does not mean redundancies. To reiterate what I said in July 2022, the government does not wish to see redundancies, and with the valuable input and assistance from our union partners, none are anticipated. While the initial staffing of the new entity will see minimal duplication of roles, reductions will occur over time through natural attrition or retirement. The reasoning behind this direction is the benefit of ensuring that any important institutional knowledge is retained into future operations while avoiding severances. Colleagues may have seen the recent job advertisements early this month for 4 additional industrial staff at Wedco. These jobs are being offered with the full knowledge of an impending amalgamation. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to state that the phased approach to the merging is moving expeditiously. Thanks must be given to the team of technical officers ably led by Mr. Andrew Diaz in his dual role as General Manager and CEO of both Wedco and BLDC respectively. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the BLDC Chairperson, Ms. Levita Fogo, JPMP, members of the BLDC Board, the Wedco Chairperson, Mr. Naltiro, JPMP, and the board at Wedco for their continued service. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to laying the required legislation before this Honorable House later this session, which will see its administration's vision for a more efficient and effective government take another step towards reality. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Members, that brings us to an end of the statements for this morning. We will now move on.
Reports of committees,
There are none.
question period.
Question period. Members, of all those statements this morning, we can expect that there would be questions, and there are many questions this morning. The first question this morning is for the statement by the Minister of Tourism. Minister, MP Kennedy would like to put a question to you this morning. MP?
Thank you and good morning, Mr. Speaker and colleagues. On page 3, under the middle of the paragraph there, the speaker highlights relief changes. And he mentions in the first 2 for a new hotel up to 15 years, and the second being a refurbished hotel up to 15 years. I was just wondering if the minister could give us some thinking behind the giving of the 15 years to both a new hotel and a refurbishment of a hotel. Typically, not always, but typically a refurbishment would not take or be as expensive as building of a new hotel. So I was wondering just if you could give us an idea of his thinking behind that.
Minister?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we're taking into consideration that we can have a very large-scale hotel that's being refurbished versus a boutique-style hotel that's being built anew. And for instance, one could cost $6 million, and as far as the new boutique-style hotel, and the other could be a $35 million refurbishment for a large hotel. And we're taking into consideration the volume, the square footage, the dollar value, the number of rooms, et cetera.
Thank you. Supplementary? Second question, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that answer. Also further on down, just curious, the last bulleted item, an attraction up to 5 years. Could the minister give us an idea of what that might be? What does that encompass, an attraction?
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, the definition of attraction is contained within the Tourism Investment Act, and the shadow minister can look there for the exact definition.
I did ask for his idea of an attraction.
He was trying to get you, give you a more personal response. Supplementary, or you're good, man?
No, that's okay.
Okay. Third question? No. Minister, that's the only questions for you this morning. We'll move on. The next statement that has questions this morning is a statement from the Minister of Labor, Economy and Labor in regard to minimum wage. The opposition whip, would you like to put your questions in?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Honorable Minister be able to clarify that the order or minimum wage will be reviewed when the new CPI or household expenditure survey is completed?
Minister?
I don't understand the nature of the question. The CPI is produced on a monthly basis.
Do you?
Yep, I can clarify. Thank you.
Yes.
During the debate, we discussed concern of inflationary pressures, or both sides of the House had raised concerns that inflationary pressure would reduce the purchasing power based on the minimum wage. So my question is, since that we are redoing the household expenditure survey, which will alter the CPI, will the minister actually review the $16.40 in the order, taking into account inflationary pressures? Thank you.
Minister?
The process for revising the minimum wage will follow the process we use to implement it, meaning that the commission will be provide the Ministry of Economy and Labor report, and the report will detail how that minimum wage will progress moving forward.
Thank you. Supplementary or second question?
Second question, please, Mr. Speaker.
Say second?
Yes, please.
Go right ahead.
My question is, does the Honorable Minister know how many employers will have to transition before the 1 June date?
Minister?
I do not know the exact number of employers who have employees that fall underneath the minimum wage.
Supplementary?
None. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Third question?
None.
None?
Oh, well, I have a supplementary here, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, supplementary. MP Jackson?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to ask the minister, and I don't know whether this applies, and I apologize in advance, but given the employer making application or making themselves known about the minimum wage in their employees, would this also apply to entrepreneurs and sole proprietors that are earning their own wage as employees?
Minister?
The Employment Act makes it extremely clear who is an employee, and the minimum wage will apply to all employees as it pertains to the Employment Act. And so an entrepreneur is not an employee as defined in the act.
Supplementary? Supplementary? No? Thank you. MP Perrin, would you still like to put your questions to the minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is an order flowing from the act that came before this honorable House in December 2022. And with your leave, Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to read what was said by the minister then before posing my question.
It's related to the question.
It
to the
is,
statement.
and this is from the Hansard. The minister said this: the member, and that was me, is trying to get into the mechanics of the $16.40 and the calculations and what will be deducted. The bill specifically speaks to two things that will be done: the regulations and an order, and the order is the order before us today. In those, this is the minister speaking, in those regulations and in the order, it will specifically speak to the deductions that are allowable and the ones that are not, and clarify the intention of the particular act. Certainly in the regulations and in the order that prescribes the minimum wage, those matters will be clarified. Minister, now that we have the order, what is the status of the regulations, and can you now clarify if the 1640 is gross or net of deductions such as pension, payroll, statutory, SI? Thank you.
Okay. Minister, you can respond, or you're responding, Deputy? Yeah.
Mr. Speaker,
And one sec, the students are leaving us this morning. We just want to thank them for joining us this morning and for observing the proceedings. Thank you. Right here. That one there. Okay, gotcha.
Continue, Minister.
The Employment Minimum Wage Entitlement Act 2022 will have a set of regulations attached to that particular act, which will clarify the matters in which the member just asked. The minimum wage order was solely designed to prescribe the minimum wage rate. The minimum wage rate is a gross rate.
Any further questions? Mr. Perrin?
Thank you. When can Bermudians expect to see the regulations, Minister?
That's a supplementary.
Supplementary, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Speaker, Acting Speaker.
After they are approved by this honorable House, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Supplementary, second supplementary. Will that be before the 1st of June date when this order takes effect?
The aim is to have the regulations set before June 1st.
No further questions. Thank you.
Supplementary.
Yes, thank you. Would the Honorable Minister clarify whether the regulations will cover the deductions that will be applied?
The order will specify and provide clarity to all the items that are not clear within the Employment Minimum Wage Entitlement Act 2022.
Any further? Mr. Richardson?
No, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Mr. Perrin?
Thank you. Second question, Mr. Acting Speaker.
Yes.
Yes, so the minister has now answered that the 1640 is a gross number. Are we therefore to anticipate that the regulations will provide that the benefits and taxes will be deductible from that number?
Minister?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. No further questions.
No further questions? No further questions for the minister? The next set of questions is to the Minister Ferbert Tenay, Opposition Leader. You have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is breaking barriers beyond the trauma. Can the minister provide what were the major takeaways from the conference?
Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I had mentioned in the ministerial statement, Mr. Deputy Speaker, on page 4, We spoke about many of the trauma labs covering many topics. Those were in the area of domestic violence and safety, working with trauma-related hurt, the impact of prenatal stress, postnatal trauma on child development. I'm not going to read them all, but there are many takeaways in all of these topics in regards to trauma. And in my opinion, one was that there is just not the intervention of counseling or talking your way through trauma, that there are many aspects within intervention in which we have to address trauma. So it's not just counseling or talking, it could be spirituality, it could be taking care of your health. There are just many different aspects that we need to be aware of when it relates to trauma.
Thank you, Minister. Any further questions? Continue.
Supplemental,
Yes.
can the minister confirm whether there was any discussions or advice in regards to youth violence and gang violence when it comes to our young people?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there was a topic of domestic violence, which when we talk about violence in general, violence in general covers many areas, whether it's gang violence, whether it's domestic violence. So the topic of violence, there are pieces that we could take away within these trauma-informed workshops that will definitely help to address gang violence.
Honorable Leader, Opposition Leader Simons.
Second question. In the statement, the minister said Dr. M. Abani Webb shared how trauma is transferred generationally, and if not treated, adults could live out their trauma and pass it on to their children. Do we have any programs here in Bermuda that can support adults so that we don't have this transferring of generational trauma?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, first just like to remind us that trauma can be with someone across their lifespan, and they definitely have to be in a place of accepting support services in order for them to actually take them on. There are services. There is the Mid-Atlantic Wellness Institute. There are also private companies that also provide services. There are churches. There are many services that are out there, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that can assist persons when they are ready for intervention.
Thank you. Mr. Simons.
Supplemental. Can those persons come to a government agency for guidance and direction in regards to eradicating the transfer of transgenerational trauma?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As this paper speaks to a conference that was held for the staff of the Department of Child and Family Services, if a client is involved with the services of the Department of Child and Family Services, then they can have access to that support.
No further questions. Ms. Jackson, you have a question for the minister on the plans, national plans for adults. Ms. Jackson.
Yes, Deputy Speaker. The statement National Plan for Adults with Intellectual Disabilities and Their Families 2023 to 2028. On page 4, there it was listed that financing will be something that will be reviewed by the committee, that families have access to the financial help to which they are entitled. I'm just curious whether the committee will be looking at how accommodations might be made to any financial assistance that is provided to families and members who may have intellectual disabilities. So in particular, having to follow the mainstream, which oftentimes means that they every year have to revalidate their disability when it may be that it's a lifelong disability. And so the process of having to do that every year can be costly and can be traumatic, and whether the review will be looking at how financial assistance might be able to accommodate a smoother relationship with members and applicants.
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, yes.
Any further questions, Ms. Jackson?
Yes, one other, and that is
Supplementary
it's
or
a
another?
supplementary.
Okay.
Just to drill a little further on the financial assistance that government may be able to provide to support the families and individuals living with intellectual disabilities, would the committee also go a step further and also consider bespoke programs? So when a person with a intellectual disability may be able to work, but maybe not enough to afford things like costly prescriptions, would financial assistance consider having relationships that would allow sort of a bespoke program or bespoke financial assistance for particular members within this community?
Minister Ferbert?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the committee does plan on working with financial assistance as stakeholders when making recommendations.
Ms. Jackson, any further?
No further questions.
Thank you. The next question is for Minister of Transport, and I think it's Ms. Jackson again.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Yes, I have questions on Bermuda's transportation system ready to welcome visitors. I'm just curious, on the first page, the minister mentioned that there would be more minibuses. Does the minister, or is the minister able to say how many more buses?
Minister Ferbert?
Not exactly, Mr. Speaker. I can tell you right now that you may be aware that I think I've mentioned before that there were buses, mini buses that were off the road. And so we've been working with mini buses to get them back on the road. And last time it was about 20 some mini buses off the road. And I believe about 8 to 10 have come back on. So we're working with them, and we'll know more by the end of April where we stand.
Jackson?
Yes, I have a supplemental. With more minibuses on the road, will there be formal regulations for minibuses? And if there are already regulations, will they be enhanced given that there'll be a greater volume of buses?
Good question, Honorable Member. As you may be aware, that there is no regulation currently for minibuses, but the technical officer are working on that right now. So we hope to have something before the season finishes.
Ms. Jackson, anything further?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Speaker. My other question is around the pushing for more on-the-road taxis. If the minister might be able to give us an idea of what the present capacity of taxis are on the road?
So there are 600 taxi permits. And again, I thought I mentioned in this Honorable House, but we had about 81 taxi drivers not licensed, 81. Since we've been pushing it to them, we told them they've got to be in place by, I think by the end of April again. And I think 21 to 30 have come back on board. And so let me clarify a few things. Some of them has gone through probate, and we cannot touch those probate ideas because the father, mother left it to the children. You know how the fight takes place as a lawyer. So the work goes on that. And second of all, there are minibus taxis which have been ordered from overseas, from China or wherever, and trying to get on one of those carriers right now is very difficult. So they're working on those things.
Jackson?
Like I said, there was 81, and we currently have about 20 back on right now.
Yes, a supplemental to that.
Yes.
With the on the road, the pushing for more on the road taxis, what exactly is going to be done to sort of organize the ground transportation in Dockyard so that there is a smooth transition of the minibuses, the taxis, and the buses?
Minister.
Thank you again for that question. As I mentioned in my statement, that WEDCO has a team up there that's working with the system My team is, I think, is right now up there talking about them, how can we improve it better and how to do different lines coming out of dockyard. So that's a challenge, but we, as I also mentioned, that we're having traffic officers at Horseshoe Bay, which was unbelievable. And we also put an additional traffic officer down in St. George's, and where the taxi drivers used to be over by the gas station. I think it's called, I forget the name of the gas station. But they'll now be organizing the taxis and minibuses and everybody else just beyond that. So there's been some improvement as far as organization.
Any further questions? Ms.
I have a
Jackson?
supplemental to the
Or
organization of the ground transport.
You've had two supplemental. You want to ask another question?
Okay, I'll ask another question. And the minister also mentioned the supplemental ferry service. Can the minister please give us an update on the regular schedule or any scheduling around the Orange Ferry?
I don't have it in my possession, but you can go online and find that.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes, will the Orange Ferry schedule be accommodating some of the concerns that were raised by the stakeholders in St. George's around the limitations there?
We had a good meeting in St. George's with the stakeholders last week or the week before last. I'm losing track what day it is now. And I can tell you right now that you may not be aware, and thanks to the honorable member, Zane DeSilva, we were able to get additional ferries for the cruise line, Norwegian cruise line, which carry hundreds of passengers. We will provide an additional service ourselves from our regular ferries. Unfortunately, we do have a ferry right now in Boston, which is being worked on, so we may not be able to do the full lift that individuals may want, but we're also looking at other transportation with regard to buses, doing direct routes from the west to the east.
Any further questions, Ms. Jackson? Mr. Simons, you have some questions?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In the statement, the Minister of Transport indicated that electric buses require less maintenance than traditional diesel buses. Can the minister provide details on the preventative and ongoing maintenance of these electric vehicles? As historically, in the past, our fleet was compromised because we didn't have robust ongoing maintenance or preventative maintenance programs.
I mean, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I can't at this moment tell you exactly what's going on. I'm not a mechanic when it comes to these issues. But if the honorable member wants further information, I will try to get it from DPT. But from our historical aspect regarding the first electrical buses that came in last year, April, there's definitely a cost savings to the government when it comes to fuel and everything else.
Mr. Simons?
Supplemental.
Yes.
Given that we have 88 buses and 70 electric buses, we know that these buses, in essence, are only as good as their batteries when it comes to service the electric buses. So can the minister confirm whether or not we will have a supply of batteries for these buses so that we can expand their longevity?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I can just say that the DPT, which has the experience, our people have traveled over to China, also to Europe, England for training, and I'm sure they'll take the necessary steps to ensure that we have capacity to move these buses.
Simons?
Second question, likewise, when it comes to the ferry services, can the minister provide an update on the maintenance programs and the proactive maintenance programs for our ferries? Because they have to be dependable, they're aged, and we just have to make sure that they're dependable and not break down. Thank you.
Mr.
Transport, okay.
Mr. Speaker, I did mention that we have a ferry, at least right now, up in Boston that is being doing maintenance, so there's work. I have confidence in staff at DPT, at Marine and Port, and these individuals have the experience. I can't stand here right now and tell you what type of maintenance is being happened because we were talking about moving individuals around the country. But the honorable members wants further information, I'll be willing to find out for it.
Seconds up? No? Okay. And okay, Minister, those are the only questions for you on your statement this morning. The next statement has questions. Is that for the Minister of National Security? Minister, MP Perriman will put questions to you this morning.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for your statement to this honorable House this morning. At the second page of your statement, you say that the fire services are already understaffed. Your statement dealt with the position at the airport. It does not appear from the budget that there's any additional funding for staff. So how are you going to deal with staff shortages at structural level?
Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In answer to the question, we will be looking at our resources and we'll do our best to address the structural needs sometime in the next fiscal year.
Supplementary.
Supplementary, yes.
You also say in your statement that you look forward to welcoming new recruits. Will you be actively recruiting during this fiscal year, this financial year?
I think the
Yes,
statement
Mr. Speaker,
indicated.
that is our intent.
Seconds up. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Minister. Do you anticipate that there will, by reason of the shortfall in staff, be any service cuts from any of the three service area providers on the island in this year? Given the shortfall in staff, does the minister anticipate there will be any cuts in the service provision from the three service locations during this year?
Mr. Speaker, all options are on the table, but at this point in time, there's nothing finalized. We're trying our best to make sure that every station is serviced.
No further question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Minister, that's the only questions for you this morning. We move on to the next statement. The next statement is that has questions, is Minister of Health. Minister of Health, MP Jackson, I'd like to put questions to you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, my question is just simple. When is the universal health care going to be introduced?
Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you'll note that this, the subject matter with respect to this ministerial statement relates specifically to health system transformation. And in that statement, I did refer to the Bermuda Health Strategy that has 8 particular points, 2022, 2025, that are all required for us to have systems transformations. One of those 8 points is the implementation of universal health care. However, it is a complex mechanism that needs to take place with respect to this. Some of the goals to achieve that, as outlined in the strategy, as well as in my statement, relate to having a national digital strategy, which we anticipate will be able to be announced in April, having the joint strategic needs assessments. Again, we anticipate the results of that being announced in April, which will allow us to have parameters so that you can't measure what you don't manage. You can't manage what you don't measure. So that joint strategic needs assessment is critically important as outlined in the Bermuda Health Strategy. So all of these components combined are critically important for us to have system-wide transformation, which includes moving towards universal health coverage, which again is a platform initiative of this government.
Supplementary?
Yes. I'd
Yeah.
like to ask the minister then when we might even see some legislation around universal health coverage being tabled in the House, and when she might foresee seeing any, or we may be able to see any kind of legislation.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding that the subject matter of this ministerial statement does not relate specifically to universal health coverage, but as I've indicated, the Bermuda Health Strategy has 8 principles that are all required for system-wide transformation. Just the implementation of universal health coverage is critically important. It is one of 8 principles that are outlined in the Bermuda Health Strategy that will relate to system-wide transformation. So insofar as when legislation would be brought here concerning universal health care, I cannot answer that. We have indicated previously through virtue of my ministerial statements that this is a complex initiative. It is something that the government is committed to. However, I need to draw members' attention to the fact that the Bermuda Health Strategy outlines 8 principles, all of them intertwined and relevant and necessary for us to move towards universal health coverage.
Supplementary?
I have a second question.
Second question, yes, go
This
ahead.
is about around the emergency room, which is on page 5. I was just wondering if the minister has statistics on the number of emergency patients that come into the hospital that could go to a GP.
Mr. Speaker, I do not have that information in front of me, but I would invite that honorable member to perhaps refer to a ministerial statement that I gave about 2 months ago as it relates to super users in the hospital. And I believe at that time, there was over 50% individuals that actually utilize the hospital quite regularly. If the honorable member is unable to find that ministerial statement, I can take endeavor to provide it to her, but it did indicate what the level of use of the emergency department was with respect to that, as well as in the budget statement.
Supplementary? Oh, that's your second, no, you asked the second question, so yes. Do you have a supplementary too?
Yeah, just one supplementary.
Yes.
Certainly, some of the constituents that I listen to, they consider their medical relationship with the emergency room. And I'm just asking the minister whether any initiatives will be put into place to change the culture of not wanting to go to the emergency room first, as almost a philosophical commitment that patients often have with the emergency room versus a GP.
Mr. Speaker, the Bermuda Hospitals Board are taking steps to remind the public of the use of the emergency room insofar as to try to minimize that to be the first call of action for individuals that may not require individual emergency services. And likewise, the nature of this statement is to help to educate and draw attention to members of the public as well, that the emergency room is just that. It's for the use of emergencies, and that it should not certainly be our first course of action in a non-emergency event.
Mhm. Further questions?
No, thank you, Mr.
Thank
Speaker.
you. No, sir, that's the end of the questions for this morning. The next statement that questions this morning is that of the Minister of Works, your statement on Bermuda housing. MP Canada, did you still have a question for that one? Yes, MP Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just want to add the sentiments from the minister on how well the Housing Trust has done. On page 2, I was looking for the audited financial report. I couldn't find it online as yet, so I figured the answer's there. But since I couldn't find it, I'll ask the minister. On the 3rd paragraph, he mentions about the loan and how well they've done as far as meeting their commitments. When does the loan mature? Is he aware of when the maturity date is of the loan?
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure when the loan matures, but it was 2006, so I'd say probably 20 years. Yeah, about 4 million left. Left on it.
Second,
Supplemental to that, yes, just one supplemental. Considering that, and I think it's admirable that it's in this position, considering the economic times that we're still in, is it thought based on the annual report that obviously the ministers had the opportunity to see? Is it some consideration when he says in the last sentence that it's hopeful that the bank will be charitable as it extends its terms? Is the minister considering possibly extending the time based on the economic times that we're in of the loan?
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I don't have that authority. The trust operates on their own. But I will say that HSBC have been extremely generous to the trust. And we're hopeful that they will continue to be so.
So, you done? Okay. MP Jackson, would you still like to put questions to the minister?
Yes, thank you, Mr.
Right
Speaker.
ahead.
It might almost be a supplemental, but I noted the 17 years that this loan has been in existence. And I was just curious if the minister knows what the interest rates are and what the length of that loan was from its original date of commencement.
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, no, I don't know what the amounts are. And that's the same question the shadow minister asked, how long, I have no idea how long it was, Mr. Speaker. But what I will say though is that when colleagues get the statement, and I can provide this copy to the shadow minister, they will see that their profits have gone up exponentially. But that's a kind of misleading thing because they've not been able to carry out maintenance. And so next year they'll be down significantly too.
All right. Supplementary?
I have a second question.
Second question?
Yeah,
Go right
it's
ahead.
about the Dr. Can Park, and the minister triggered it with the mentioning of maintenance. How exactly does the ministry provide maintenance support to Dr. Can Park?
Mr. Speaker, we actually do not, well, it is ad hoc support that the ministry will provide. The trust carries out its own maintenance on a regular basis. And they will call on us on occasion. And I recall a few years ago, the last time that we interceded there was a challenge with the trash compactor, and they got a new one that could not fit in the space. And so we done the construction work to expand the space and provide the electrical input. And so where we have resources in the ministry that we don't have to contract out to the private sector, we'll help them in any way we can. Additionally, we provided support to the renovation of a unit at Ferguson Park, turning it from one unit into two, and all of that management and organization and planning issues and what have you was handled by the project managers at Housing Corporation at no charge to the trust.
Further questions? Supplementary?
I do. I have one more. It's still about the,
Supplementary?
yeah,
Yeah.
maybe, the Dr. Can Park. That is the buildings are multi-story, and as we have an increasing aging population and people are living longer, is the ministry working with the Housing Trust at all to investigate and maybe review and come up with any way that we might accommodate the fact that there are multi-stories of steps in the Dr. Can Park, and how that's going to work as people get that much older? Are we going to move people out if they cannot navigate the stairs? Has anybody really thought that through?
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, let me just first say that Dr. Can Park is Exhibit A as to why we should not do non-traditional builds in Bermuda. It was cheaper, it was quicker, but it doesn't survive the elements in Bermuda. And so one of the biggest challenges is there are wooden staircases on all 5 buildings, and there have been significant challenges with the deterioration of them. But in relation to the honorable member's question, there are elevators in each building. And so that's a challenge too. There's 5 elevators that require a fair amount of maintenance and a fair amount of challenges when they are not working. One of the things I also said in my statement, which is critical to the trust's work and care for seniors, is that it is designed for people who can live on their own, and everybody coming in can live on their own. But all of us are headed to a place where we probably won't be able to live on our own. And it's always a challenge and a delicate one to have the conversation with folk that maybe they need to go into a facility that provides medical care as opposed to living at Dr. Camp Park. But I will also say that there have been several discussions with the trust about building another property. And that's over the last 5 years or so. There are a number of issues with that, and not the least of which is trying to figure out the challenges with maintenance. They have 5 facilities, and some of them are quite old, and so therefore require a fair amount of maintenance. And so the challenge is that one of the things that I've learned in this job about seniors and seniors care is that being in the housing business for seniors, it's not a profitable entity at all. In fact, it usually is the opposite. You have to subsidize. And so the reliance of the trust is on donations and contributions, and they do a fairly good job at that. But in this climate, obviously the numbers have reduced. And so whatever resources the Ministry of Public Works has that we can provide assistance to the trust to achieve their mandate without cost, we'll continue to do so, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. No further questions?
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Minister, your next statement that has questions this morning is in reference to the Redco annual report. Was MP Kennedy, do you have a question for his report or for the? On the road works, that's what it was, so I thought, you're right. Okay, you can put your question now.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Speaker, and certainly probably the minister's favorite subject, the roads. On page 4, the second paragraph, I guess I was trying to map out as he was reading along the area that's being covered and these pool holes. I was just curious then, and it wasn't quite clear. Do we have, are there any more pool holes that are needed east of Harrington Sound, Flats area going back to St. George's, St. David's? Are there any more pool holes there?
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, that's an easy answer, no. All of Flats is done. Where they're starting from now by Whitney Institute, everything east of there has been done.
Thank you. No supplementaries? No further questions. Members, that brings us to a close of the question period for today. We will move on.
Reports of committees.
There are none.
Question, hold on.
Obituary.
We did question period. Congratulatory and/or obituary speeches.
MP Simmons, you jumped up very quickly at the back there. Would you like to make a contribution at this time?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and
Go right
good morning. I rise on a sad note today at the passing of one of my school teachers and a school teacher of great renown in the West End community, Ms. Diana Hunt. And I've had a number of my colleagues, including the Premier, want to be associated with her. Condolences on her passing.
Mm-hmm.
She was a remarkable woman on many levels. And I can tell you, she's probably the only person who gave me licks more than my mama. So she believed in licks.
Yeah.
She believed in licks. But I think what I remember her best for is her warrior spirit. Because we talk about the West End warriors, and she had an indomitable warrior spirit. She was a warrior for our children. As firm and strong and disciplinarian as she was, she continued to be an advocate for their educational success and achievement up to the day she passed. She was a West End warrior for Somerset Cricket Club, maintaining the history of the organization at a level that I think no one else has ever been able to achieve. She was a warrior for West End Primary. I think some of my colleagues have seen some of her firepower over the past couple of months and knew how passionate she was about retaining that historic Black school. And she was a warrior for our community. Every community event, community cause, community charity, she was there. And she played a very particular pivotal role in my life as a student of hers, because I only served half a year with her. My parents, we actually had to go to Jamaica for about 6 months. But she prepared the lesson plan to make sure that I wouldn't fall behind my classmates. So when I returned, and the plan she gave, I was actually ahead of the game when I came back. So we in the SANS community owe her a tremendous debt. We are thankful to our family for allowing her to be shared with us. and we hope that they are comforted during this very sad time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. MP Premier, thank you. Premier, would you like to make a contribution at this time?
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to be associated with remarks given by the honorable member from constituency number 33, Sand South. As we spoke last night, Mr. Speaker, and I heard the news, just, reflections, because Ms. Hunt was always as described. And as I share with you, I keep all of her little books of which she gave. So Cut Match, she wanted to make sure she gave me a book on the history of Somerset Cricket Club. She wanted to make sure she gave me a little book that she put together on West End and other things. She was an amazing woman, and I want to make sure that I could associate with her remarks and extend the condolences on behalf of certainly all of us, but certainly us here on this side in the Progressive Labor Party, in which she was a stalwart supporter and always someone who we could count on. Mr. Speaker, I'd also wish to ask the Honorable House to please send a letter of condolences to the family of my constituent, Mr. Raymond De Silva of Mount Hill, who recently passed away at the age of 82. I certainly join in sending heartfelt prayers to his wife, Rose, his sons, Ray and Joseph, and to his stepchildren, grandchildren, and certainly his loved ones. Mr. Speaker, I was not here at the beginning, as I did inform that I had an appointment, but I do want to take this opportunity on behalf of the government and all of us here assembled, as you stated earlier, to wish a very happy retirement to our departing clerk to the legislature and my cousin, Ms. Shernette Wolf. This is her last official day of sitting in this honorable house. She has been here for a while. She is a veritable institution around here, and her expertise, her candor, her feistiness will be missed without question. Facing, that's what it's called. I will certainly miss her fashion advice, but I know that she will go on going forward to continue to provide for many. The work that she's done during her time in the legislature has certainly been invaluable, and she is committed to parliamentary reform, something that I will express disappointment will not be able to be delivered before she steps down, but I have no doubt that we will make sure to deliver it during this particular legislative session. So I am grateful for her service. I'm grateful for the time of which she's given to youth parliament, the time of which she's given to parliamentary committees, the time of which she's given to mentor, and also the time of which she has shared with us. So I wish her all the best in her retirement, Mr. Speaker and Madam Clerk. Thank you so much for your work.
Yeah. MP Lister, would you like to make your contribution?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, first I'd like to start off following where MP Simmons left with sending condolences to the family of Miss Diane Hunt, well-known community member of the Somerset community. Myself, in the past years, I've served on the management of Somerset Cricket Club, and while Ms. Hunt wasn't on the management during my time, one of the last things under the new presidency of Mr. Scott, I was tasked with looking at the education history of Somerset Cricket Club. And I must say that, unfortunately, I was supposed to sit with Ms. Hunt to gather and collect information. I have to say, unfortunately, I wasn't able to do that before her passing. So it is a big miss, the knowledge, the history that she has, and that hopefully there could be someone that will take her place and carry on with knowing the history and tradition of Somerset Cricket Club. So I send condolences to her family and just to the wider Somerset community. On that note, a few more condolences I'd like to send, Mr. Speaker, to Ms. Ivy DeFonts, a constituent of mine of Brent House Hill, to her family to send condolences to her, and a few not relatives but close people, Mr. Speaker. This week, the island of Bermuda, I say, lost Mr. Gerald Simons. He's a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church like myself, where I know him from, and I like to associate associate the Hill House, Mr. Speaker. He was a very bubbly, loving, fun-filled person. Every time you saw him, he had a smile on his face and always had a good laugh. And in his last days, you wouldn't have known he had any sickness because he just didn't carry it with him. He went on living life to the fullest. So condolences to his family, and I know his sons very well. Also, Mr. Speaker, to the family of, I say, Uncle John Simmons, family member of mine from 2 Rotary Lane Sands. He passed, and so I'd like to send condolences associate Jamal Simmons. I know associate yourself with her family, and our Minister Wilson also, as that is also family of hers. So condolences to the family of Mr. John Simmons. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, on some good notes, last week there was slipped my mind now, the sports awards. I'd like to say congratulations to all the winners, but to highlight the two overall top male and top female for the year, Mr. Janai Parentchief and Ms. Flora Duffy. Congratulations to them that they continue persevering in their sports. I also like to send congratulations, Mr. Speaker, to the PHC Cricket Football Club for winning the BFA Premier Division. Even though I'm a Somerset fan and member, I still can send congratulations to them because they do border my constituency, Mr. Speaker. And also, last but not leastly, congratulations to one of the members, not members, but
Thank you,
Mr.
member.
Lamb on his getting married in this house, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, thank you. You've been up? Oh. Of course, you get up for a second. Members, it is that time. Mr. Rubin?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that the Honorable House to now adjourn for lunch to return at 2 p.m.
Any objections? None. The House now stands adjourned until 2 p.m. I'll indicate that when we return, the Deputy Speaker will be in the chair. I'll be next door attending a funeral for Mrs. Flood. Thank you. The House now stands adjourned.